and also warmer than yesterday. However, there will only be limited bright or sunny breaks for many, with some showers also likely. It will also be less unsettled than yesterday for Northern Ireland. Here there will still be quite a few spells of rain this afternoon, but we should also see some sunny breaks. The more persistent rain will clear southwards this evening, but it will remain cloudy and quite damp for many. And that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Anaya Falarin Iman, for the discussion every Sunday at 3 p.m. here. From big ideas to questions shaping the public conversation, we tackle the moral, cultural and political implications of news stories.
We need to share this conversation democratically.
It has become so toxic, this debate.
They relish this kind of discourse.
From fascinating guests to challenging ideas, you won't want to miss it. The discussion every Sunday at 3 p.m. here, GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Frazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. We've got another jam-packed show for you this afternoon. We're going to be discussing our politicians. It's been an absolutely awful week for the reputation of them. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle wants to see radical reforms of how Westminster works. What have we done to deserve this lot? We're going to be discussing that. Also, we'll look at why 8,000 British Army troops are being deployed to take part in exercises across Eastern Europe. But first, it's the news with Olivia Guthrie.
Darren, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. Here's the latest from the newsroom. GB News can reveal hundreds of people on board multiple small boats have been intercepted in the English Channel by UK authorities this morning. It follows 11 days in which no small boats made it into British waters. Since first light, at least 7 vessels have been spotted and intercepted. At least 230 people have now been taken to the UK Border Force's processing centre in Dover. It's reported an estimated 54 people who fled the steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol have arrived at a temporary accommodation centre in the Donetsk region. A source says buses of evacuees with Ukrainian number plates were in convoy with Russian troops and vehicles displaying United Nations symbols. It's as the Pope condemns Russia's attack on Mariupol, describing it as being barbarously bombarded and destroyed. He's urged Moscow to establish a humanitarian corridor to evacuate those still sheltering inside the Azovstal steel plant. President Zelensky says Russian attacks in the east continue.
The occupiers are gathering additional forces for new attacks against our military in the east of the country. Russia has brought reinforcements in the Kharkiv region, trying to increase pressure in the Donbas. They've lost more than 23,000 soldiers in the battles of this senseless war, but they do not stop.
Here in the UK, a series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations involving MPs in Parliament has seen women working in Westminster share stories of men acting like animals. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is today calling for radical reform to make the House safer and more inclusive. It's after MP Neil Parish resigned after being caught watching pornography in the Commons. Chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Caroline Noakes, told GB News policy reform is overdue.
If somebody had been watching pornography on the checkout in Tesco's or in any other workplace, they'd have been out the door that afternoon. And that's the significant difference, and where so many of us felt let down over the course of the past few days, is that there wasn't that swift mechanism that could work. There wasn't the ability to say, well, look, here's a policy. It's in contravention of the policy. Then you can take all of the personalities out of it if something is in contravention of a clearly stated policy. And a lot of us have been calling for that for a long time.
Well, Tory party chairman Oliver Dowden says the Conservative Party will make sure its candidate list becomes more equal. He told the Sunday Telegraph it should reflect the fact that half of the population are women. Around a quarter of Tory candidates at the 2019 election were women, but Labour managed more than half. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries says ensuring a majority of women in Parliament could help tackle Westminster sleaze. Interest rates are expected to be increased on Thursday to their highest level for 13 years. Economists predict the Bank of England will increase rates from 0.75% to 1%, a number not seen since early 2009. Members of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee have raised rates at each of its past 3 meetings as parts of attempts to rein in record inflation. It comes as the war in Ukraine adds to the ongoing cost of living crisis. The Business Secretary has written to North Sea oil and gas firms asking them to come up with a plan to increase domestic production. Kwasi Kwarteng says the industry must invest in homegrown energy production to boost the British economy and bring down consumer bills in the long term. He said firms must also set out plans for investment in clean energy ahead of a meeting in the coming weeks. COVID guidance in Scotland's changed from today. Those with the virus no longer need to self-isolate, but they're still being advised to stay at home. Contract tracing has also come to an end as case numbers continue to fall. The number of COVID infections now has dropped for the 5th successive week, with about 1 in 25 people having the virus. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Darren.
Hello and welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle wants to see radical reforms of how Westminster works. Conservative Neil Parish MP quit his job yesterday for looking at porn in the House of Commons, not once, but twice. Senior Labour MP Liam Byrne has been suspended from the Commons for bullying. In our Culture Roll, we'll be discussing how can we fix Parliament and just what did we do to deserve this lot. We'll be going back to basics on Russian gas this afternoon. Russia cut off its gas exports to Poland and Bulgaria, claiming the hand was forced. We'll look at how dependent we are upon that Russian gas and just what the alternatives might be. The UK will be deploying 8,000 troops for exercises across Eastern Europe in a show of the Western world's resolve against Russia's continued aggression. This is one of the largest deployments of personnel since the Cold War. That's what we're talking about and more over the next hour. Please let me know your thoughts. Your view is much more important than my own. How do we fix Parliament and just what have we done to deserve this lot? You can get involved if you know anyone who has gone out, British troops in Eastern Europe. What do you make of it? Are your loved ones potentially going out there at this dangerous moment? Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on our GB News page. Cheers very much. I've been around politics long enough, folks, to know that the problem with it is that there is a culture of drink, inflated egos and long hours, not institutional sexism, as the Tory MP Caroline Noakes has said. The Conservative Party, of all political parties, with two female leaders of that party, one somewhat more successful than the other, I think it's safe to say, is undoubtedly a testament to the idea that you don't need diversity quotas for women to get ahead. I don't doubt for a second, right, that things may well have been horrific for women in politics in the past. We'll be hearing from Anne Widdecombe, a politician who's been around to perhaps experience some of that. Not just politics in many male-dominated workplaces. I think you could argue that things were pretty awful for women. That's rightly changing. That culture is changing. But I fear that the Conservative Party, with its record of allowing women to get ahead on being the best person for the job, is actually at risk of putting women forward purely because, folks, they happen to have a vagina, right? Basing it entirely around a person's immutable characteristics. The Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has called for radical reform to work and practices after a string of, as I say, bullying and sexual misconduct offences involving MPs. That should occur, right? With each passing week these days, the Palace of Westminster accrues more HR issues than Hugh Hefner's Playboy mansion. But the Conservatives would learn the wrong lessons from this saga were they to agree with party chairman Oliver Dowden, who said that the party must now ensure half of the Conservative MPs returned at the next election are women. Were in replacing Neil Parish, the MP quitting after admitting he watched pornography twice in Parliament, were the Tories to decide that the only thing to do now is to create these all-women shortlists, I think, folks, they'd be doing women a disservice. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why that is. Suppose you're selected, right, on your immutable characteristics, on being the owner of a vagina, or some other arbitrary condition, rather than being the right candidate for the job. In that case, you'll always be thought of as a diversity hire, a tokenistic target, or as second best to those who truly deserved the job. That's not the lesson we should be learning from this. Women who care about politics, women who care about their communities, they're just as worthy as a place in Parliament as men. But it has to be a selection based solely on merit. Once the Tories go down this route of box ticking, of quotas like a pick and mix of X number of MPs that are women, black, brown, gay, trans, or whatever else, then I'm afraid they make themselves just as bad as their political opponents. Political opponents that see us all through the lens of identity, and not, folks, crucially, as the individuals that we all are. Now, folks, as I say, senior MPs have been calling for a drastic overhaul of Westminster. This is after a series of sexual misconduct and bullying claims about politicians. The Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has said radical action is needed and a review of working practices. In my cultural segment today, I'm asking, how do we fix Parliament? To help me do that, I'm joined first of all by Graham Stringer, Labour MP for Blackley and Broughton, and Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative Party Minister and MEP. Anne, can I start with you, please? Do you think that we actually need quotas to get more women into Parliament? Is that what's needed to actually change the culture of Parliament that way?
Absolutely not. And the only thing that upset me about that introduction that you've just done is you're talking as if it's something new. In fact, both major parties have been practicing positive discrimination now for a very long time. And indeed, I personally witnessed a selection, personally saw it, as long ago as before I left Parliament. So while I was still there, I left in 2010, I actually saw a selection in which the selection committee was told in terms, not by implication, in terms, you can't select on merit, you've got to have an equal number of men and women on the shortlist, quite regardless of where the women may have come in the selection process. And so that is positive discrimination. It hasn't improved the quality of Parliament. It hasn't improved the position of women. And I am a great believer in selection on merit and merit alone, whether we're talking about women or people of ethnic origin or sexuality or anything else. In Parliament, the selection should be solely on merit.
So, Anne, you would disagree with Caroline Noakes MP, who is, it's safe to say, no ally of the current government or Prime Minister, but she has actually accused Parliament of, or at least the Conservative Party rather, of being institutionally sexist.
Yes, and she's also come down on the side of instant justice, not accusation followed by investigation followed by judgment, but immediate judgment, immediate dismissal, immediate going. So I don't have much respect for her thought processes anyway.
Graham, can I come to you now, please? You've been a Member of Parliament for a number of years. I won't embarrass you. But these calls for reforms in Parliament, for for MPs that are facing allegations of sexual misconduct, do you actually think this is necessary? Is this about time? Is it laudable in your view?
My party went down the road of all women shortlists, having followed the percentage of women on shortlists, because it saw that there was a problem that was a small minority of MPs of all parties who were women. That was a particular problem that we decided needed to be resolved. As far as the Labour Party is concerned, that's now resolved. Men are in a minority in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I think we should go back to precisely what Anne says, that selection should be wholly on merit, having solved that original problem. But it was a problem, and just choosing previously, 25, 30 years ago, on merit didn't really deal with that issue. We've done that, and I think Parliament is better for it, not necessarily with more able MPs, but it feels more representative of the country as a whole.
Yeah.
Incidentally, it hasn't actually solved the problem of prejudice, sexism in Parliament. It may or may not have made it worse. That is a different factor. It's dealing with whether or not the Commons looks like the whole of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember, well, I wasn't actually politically aware, we'll say, back in that time, but, it's 25 years on since Tony Blair's government was put into power, and the press were waxing lyrical about Blair's babes, right? We've moved on quite some time from those days, haven't we, Anne?
Well, let me tell you a story about Blair's babes, which is absolutely true. About 6 months after they all got in, one of them came up to me in a corridor and said to me, "Anne, isn't it horrible how the men are so rude to us?" And I said, "Yes. And isn't it horrible how they're so rude to each other?" And she hadn't thought of that. She'd just been roughed up in the chamber. She assumed it was because she was a woman. In fact, it was because she was useless.
Well, Graham, do you think it's moved on in a good way?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say that again? Sorry.
Do you think it's moved on in the right way? Because you've got the likes of the International Trade Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, of course, with a pretty harrowing tale of being pinned up against a wall by a male MP. These sort of revelations are still coming out now, so some viewers might well be saying, well, it doesn't sound like the culture's there just yet.
I think if you listen to what people like Anne Taylor, who was a Labour chief whip from in the early part of this century, or you read what Shirley Williams has written when she was one of a very small number of women Labour MPs in the 60s and 70s, then things are definitely better. But that doesn't mean that there aren't pretty appalling pieces of atrocious behaviour by some men. And that can be dealt with really by complaining either through the party system or the new system that's been set up in the Commons. And that is the way that it should be dealt with. The stuff about watching pornography in the Commons chamber recently is just simply appalling behaviour. Neil Parish has resigned, which he should have done. But it's a very rare, well, as far as I know, it's a unique occurrence, that. And where there is bad and appalling behaviour, then I think the parties and the Commons have a duty to deal with it. And as Anne said earlier, by due process.
Yeah, and a Conservative Party inquiry into the Basic Instinct row, you know, that one about Angela Rayner being found, well, alleging, shall we say, the Daily Mail alleged that Angela Rayner was trying to distract the Prime Minister by using her dress. Now, she herself, the Mail are now saying, was the source of the story. Now, we all waxed lyrical this time last week about how this was a sign of misogyny in the House of Commons. This is all a new element. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, there was a complete overreaction. I mean, when Boris talked about unleashing the terrors of the earth, you would think we were talking about high treason. And then we have the Speaker summoning the editor of a national newspaper into his presence. And then it transpires that the origin of this was a joke by Angela herself on the terrace, chatting informally to Tory MPs. And it was a joke. And if it had been made clear right from the start that it had come from Angela, I don't think anybody would have taken it seriously. But a very distorted version was produced, which appeared to proceed from misogyny rather than a joke from the lady herself. And Labour took a very long time, I have to say, to acknowledge the truth of the matter, just as they have over their own version of Partygate. And we really cannot have a situation in which the reputation of Parliament is dragged through the mud when actually the facts are rather different. And I have no doubt at all that there are individual MPs who behave badly. They always have through time immemorial. But I was in Parliament for 23 years when there weren't very many of us there. 23 years, I never encountered any bad behaviour other than the very odd, light-hearted comment, which I took to be light-hearted. And I think we're in danger of losing our sense of humour sometimes.
Graham, is Anne not right that we're at risk here of throwing the, the meritocratic baby out with the diversity bathwater here, out of a few newspaper reports that have shown to be they're quite different this week than they were last week, shall we say, around the Angela Rayner story. And, of course, now coming to light of Neil Parish, he's gone off his own accord. Do we really need fundamental reform of the whole system? Should we really be tarnishing the entire reputation of our parliamentary system through what are essentially a few bad apples?
I think the Angela Rayner issue was a trivialisation of politics, sort of wound up by the Mail on Sunday, and then both the Prime Minister and my party exaggerated the importance of it. I mean, I'm not sure it was a joke, but it was a trivialisation of politics, and we have major international events happening at the present time which are very frightening. We have problems with our own economy. We need to be focused on those, not on how Angela Rayner sits in the House of Commons. It's not a surprise that women have legs, quite frankly. And I think making sure that where there is appalling behaviour, and like Anne, I have seen very few examples in the 25 years I've been in the Commons of bad behaviour. I'm sure it happens from time to time. Then it is up to the parties, it's up to the Commons authorities to deal with it via due process and quickly.
Okay.
Going back to Neil Parish, one of the sad things, apart from for him and his family, was that if you went on to social media, you had a lot, well, not a lot, 2 or 3 MPs who their names being circulated as potentially those MPs who'd been looking at pornography in the Commons chamber. So being transparent and quick about this and then sorting it out quickly is more important than a complete change of the system. If we change the system, it happened with MPs' expenses, where there'd been people cheating and stealing from the system. We've now ended up with an incredibly bureaucratic and expensive system, which could have been dealt with by complete transparency. And if we go, as the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, I've known he was elected the same day I was. He represents the seat not far from me. I have great respect for him, support him as Speaker, but we don't need to set up another bureaucratic system that puts MPs in conflict with civil servants who they say, we employ the person for you who's working for you, and you say, but I want him or her to do this, and they say, well, you can't. It just puts unnecessary costs and conflict into the system.
Thank you, Graham. Now, I wish I was talking to the two of you about your experiences and the fact that inflation and all these other things are running as high as they are, but unfortunately we're talking about Angela Rayner's legs and Neil Parish looking at porn. But there we are. That was Graham Stringer, Labour MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and Anne Widdecombe, the former Conservative Party Minister and MEP. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we'll be going back to basics in our virtual classroom. Today's subject is Russian gas. But first, folks, let's have a little look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather cloudy with limited sunshine and outbreaks of rain in the west and southwest. Let's take a look at the details. It'll be a cloudy evening across southwest England with patchy outbreaks of rain. The rain heaviest in the north and over the moors, although some brighter spells are possible too. The southeast of England will be mostly cloudy too, but will be drier in general. A little light rain is possible for a time. It'll be a rather damp end to the day for southern Wales, a mostly cloudy picture with outbreaks of showery rain, especially in the west. The cloudy theme to the weather continues across the Midlands this Sunday evening. A little patchy, mostly light rain is possible at times, but most places will remain dry with some bright spells. There'll be a brighter end to the day for northeast England, with some sunny spells likely here this evening. The odd shower is also possible, but remaining mostly dry for most. It'll be a similar story for southern Scotland this evening. Some sunny spells are likely, and most will have some bright spells too. Some bright or sunny spells are also likely across Northern Ireland this evening after a cloudy, damp day, becoming mostly dry with just an isolated shower likely, mainly in the north. Rain clearing south overnight, but remaining rather cloudy with some mist and fog patches developing. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Frazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. The time is 2:27 and we're going to pop back to my virtual classroom. Now, Russia has stopped gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. The Russian energy company Gazprom halted gas exports because of their refusal to pay in rubles, the currency, of course, of Russia. So to discuss Russian gas and the possible alternatives, I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Bradshaw. He's a professor of global energy at Warwick Business School, a very clever chap. Hello to you. Now, what is Russian gas and why are the EU reliant upon it so heavily? The UK is much less so, isn't it?
That's right. When we talk about Russian gas, what we're talking about is gas that's being produced in fields in Siberia, in the east of Russia, then transported over long distances by gas pipelines to consumers in Europe. And this pipeline system has been in existence for about 50 years. And over that time, Europe has had a steady and reliable trade in pipeline gas from Russia, and before it, the Soviet Union. But the events of the last week or so are really quite a precedent in the sense that Russia itself has broken contracts, something it's never done before. We're at the end of that very long pipeline, but the good news is we don't actually rely on that Russian gas that much. Partly because obviously we have our own production in the North Sea, but that peaked around 2000, and since then we've become an importer. We do import now about half the gas we consume, but of that, about 30% comes from Norwegian fields directly to the UK, and the remaining 20% comes as liquefied natural gas from a variety of sources, most predominantly from Qatar. In recent years, some of that has also been Russian LNG, but we're also sourcing LNG from the United States.
Michael, would it not be right to say that actually if we consider the global market, the marketplace of gas, we are we are impacted by the Russia saying, hang on, we're not exporting this anymore, we want rubles or nothing else. We are actually impacted by that because if Russia chokes off its supply, that boosts prices in the marketplace because there's less in the way of supply on the market, isn't it? But the demand is the same.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true. And I think you've already made a distinction there in what you said between what we might call physical security of supply. Have we got access to the gas that we need? And what we might call price security. What do we have to pay to get that gas? And in the UK, we're stuck between almost at the moment a rock and a hard place in the sense that we are exposed to whatever happens in terms of shortage of gas coming from Russia into Europe. But relying on liquefied natural gas in a global market, we're also exposed to competitive pressures, and those were particularly extreme when we came out of the pandemic, although they've calmed down of late. So we have to pay that international to track the gas that we need.
I mean, closer to home, the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has actually written to energy companies calling on them to reinvest their profits to help ease the cost of living crisis. Are you supportive of those measures?
I think what he's been saying is that, given that the oil companies are making unexpected windfall profits, he would expect to see them putting some of that money back into investing both in conventional production offshore in the UK, but also into renewable energy, because these oil companies are at the moment trying to transform themselves from primarily being oil and gas companies to being energy companies and investing in new renewable energy. So I think he's looking for evidence that that's what companies are going to do with these funds, reinvest in businesses that they might have, say, in the North Sea, but also invest in renewable energy in the UK.
In a sentence, we're still going to need that North Sea, aren't we?
We are, but we have to be realistic that it's a province in decline, and we're talking about the extent to which we may be able to slow down the decline rate. The government's always had a policy of what it calls maximising economic recovery, trying to get as much of the remaining oil and gas out of the ground. That hasn't changed. It's become more complicated because the government is also concerned about its net zero targets. But yes, the fact that we have 50% of our gas coming from our own fields at the moment places us in a much stronger position than other countries in continental Europe.
Indeed. Well, Professor Michael Bradshaw, thank you very much for your time and your expertise on Real Britain today. Now, folks, you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Next, we'll be discussing the invasion of Ukraine. 8,000 British troops are going to Eastern Europe to take part in exercises. But before that, folks, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you, Darren. It's 2:32. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Well, GB News can reveal hundreds of people on board multiple small boats have been intercepted by UK authorities in the English Channel today. It follows 11 days in which no small boats made it into British waters. Since first light, at least 7 vessels have been spotted and intercepted, and at least 230 people have now been taken to the UK Border Force's processing centre in Dover. The United Nations has confirmed that an operation is underway to evacuate people from Mariupol. It's reported an estimated 54 people who fled the steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol have arrived at a temporary accommodation centre in the Donetsk region. A source says buses of evacuees with Ukrainian number plates were in convoy with Russian troops and vehicles displaying United Nations symbols. A series of bullying and sexual misconduct allegations involving MPs in Parliament has seen women working in Westminster share stories of men acting like animals. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is today calling for radical reform to make the House safer and more inclusive. It's after MP Neil Parish resigned after being caught watching pornography in the Commons. The May Day marches are getting underway in London. Members of the public have joined trade union members calling for help for workers struggling to tackle the cost of living crisis. The TUC says it needs stronger wage bargaining rights, and the government should introduce an emergency budget to give direct support to people with surging bills. COVID guidance in Scotland has changed from today. Those with the virus no longer need to self-isolate, but are still being advised to stay at home. Contact tracing has also come to an end as case numbers continue to fall. DAB, online and on television. This is GB News. We'll be back to Real Britain after this short break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Frazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Now, folks, Russia is reportedly ramping up its attacks ahead of a possible renewed offensive in the east of Ukraine. President Zelensky claims Russia has lost more than 23,000 soldiers so far in their war. And now 8,000 British Army troops are to take part in exercises across Eastern Europe to combat Russian aggression in one of the largest deployments since the Cold War. I'm now joined by Con Coughlin, defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at The Telegraph. Hi, Con, thank you very much for your time today. Con, can I just ask you, what do we actually know about the role of these 8,000 troops who are being deployed in eastern Ukraine? Many British people will be saying, well, hang on a minute. This surely is going to really poke the Russian bear.
Well, good afternoon, Darren. Good to be with you. First of all, the deployment of the 8,000 British troops is part of a Nato exercise. Our exercise is called Exercise Hedgehog. And as part of that, we are going to send artillery and tanks and a full armoured group, a battle group, to our eastern flank of NATO. The main purpose of this is an act of deterrence. This is to send a very clear signal to the Kremlin that we will not tolerate any incursion into NATO territory. And of course, with the conflict taking place in Ukraine, and with a lot of countries like Poland that have borders with Ukraine providing military support to the Ukrainian forces, there is a risk that Russia might be tempted to attack some of these countries. So I think this deployment, this exercise, is really necessary, not just for us, but for the whole NATO alliance, to send a very strong signal to the Kremlin that we mean business, and that his military adventurism into NATO territory will not be tolerated.
I mean, Con, can I ask you, as a member of a generation not old enough to remember the Cold War, in your opinion, are we closer to the threat of nuclear war than we ever have been since that Cold War?
Well, Darren, it's certainly a possibility. But the reason there was no nuclear war during the Cold War is that the nuclear deterrent that we and America and France were able to put into play deterred any such escalation. And you talk about generations. Well, there's a whole generation of senior military officials in Russia that know very well how the nuclear deterrent playbook works. And if Russia was silly enough, if Mr. Putin was stupid enough to start threatening us with nuclear weapons, he would be looking at the utter destruction of Russia within a period of seconds. I mean, this is no laughing matter. So while Putin has been making all kinds of threatening noises about the Russian nuclear arsenal, the point is it's a zero-sum game for him, and that if he were to move anywhere near using these weapons, he would end up with Russia and himself being obliterated. So I personally think this is just scaremongering on the part of Putin, who, of course, is losing the war in Ukraine, as you said in your introduction. So he's sort of thrashing around, looking for ways to make himself look big and powerful. But to my mind, this is an empty threat.
Well, I certainly hope so. How much have the United Kingdom actually played a role in arming the Ukrainians? And how much of a role have British troops, with the expertise of the British Armed Forces, actually played a role in ensuring that the Ukrainians were able to put up as robust a defence of Ukraine as they have done?
Well, I think the British Army and others, including the Americans, have been deeply involved. We've been deeply involved since the invasion of Crimea in 2014. And the fact the Ukrainians were able to muster such a brilliant defence of their capital, Kyiv, when the Russians first invaded, shows just how dramatically their ability to defend themselves has increased since the Crimea invasion in 2014. They've managed to shoot down a lot of Russian aircraft, both fighter jets, transport aircraft and helicopters. They've destroyed hundreds of Russian tanks and artillery units and other armoured vehicles. And as you said in your introduction, the latest estimates is that in excess of about 20,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. These are significant losses for Russia. These losses are greater than they suffered in nearly 10 years of fighting in Afghanistan in the 1980s. So this is a very serious blow for the Russians. And I think a credit to us and the Americans for helping the Ukrainians to train to a level and be equipped to a level where they can give the Russians a bloody nose.
Yeah. Con, how much you've been following all of this as the defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at the Daily Telegraph. How much do you actually think that it was somewhat naive to assume, as I think many Western nations did, to just say, all right, well, Russia's not a problem anymore? I remember a very famous debate between President Barack Obama and the then contender for the presidency, Mitt Romney, in which President Obama laughed at Mitt Romney for suggesting that Russia was still a threat to the Western nations. How much did the Western world take its eyes off of the ball in an incredibly naive and reckless fashion?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of complacency about Russia. And a decade ago, Darren, the main focus was on defeating Islamist terrorism. And I remember going to a conference in Washington with the chiefs of the American military, and we had a vote, what is the bigger threat, Islamic State and Al-Qaeda or Russia? And all the military people there voted 9-10 in favour of Russia being the biggest threat. So, I mean, the military stroke security establishment in both Washington and here in London have been very much aware of this. But the politicians, I think, have felt that if only we sit down and talk with Putin, if we maintain trade ties, then that will encourage good behaviour from Moscow. And of course, German Chancellor Angela Merkel was foremost amongst those advocating this position. And that's where the naiveties come in. And that's where the mistakes have been made at a political level. And even here in London, I think the Cameron government, Theresa May, even after the Salisbury poisonings, they talk about holding Russia to account, but nothing very much was done. The oligarchs continued to work and operate in London and raise money in London. So I think the political classes on both sides of the Atlantic have a lot to answer for.
Well, indeed, Con Coughlin, and I hope that we're going to actually get serious on this, because as you say, the Salisbury poisonings, Russian agents there, we should have been serious about actually bolstering our defences then. But Con Coughlin, defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at The Telegraph, thank you very much for your time and expertise. today. Now, folks, it's 2:45 and it's time for my favourite segment. It's time for scrap, reform or keep. And this afternoon, folks, we're going to be we're looking at minimum unit pricing. Now, what is that? It was introduced by the Scottish Government in 2018 as a way of reducing the appeal of cheap alcohol to prevent, purportedly, the health problems caused by alcoholism. To talk about this now, I'm joined by Chris Snowden, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Now, Chris, looking at your report out through the IEA, I'm assuming that you're very much in the scrap camp. You think that this, far from being effective at getting people off booze, has just meant that people are paying more for it.
Yeah, and not only are people paying more for it, which everybody expected. I mean, that was the point of the policy, to get people to pay more for alcohol. They're actually paying a lot more than was projected. The whole policy was built around some computer models from some academics at Sheffield University. And there was a lot of chat around the time it came in. People were saying, well, it's not going to cost moderate drinkers very much. It's overall, it was estimated it might cost the average Scottish drinker £5 per year. Our estimate says it's more like £20 per year. Since the policy came in, which is to the day 4 years ago, May the 1st, 2018, we estimate it's cost the Scottish consumer £270 million in total. And politicians are always raising the cost of living in some way or other, but usually they do it with taxes. Minimum pricing is a little bit different insofar as the government doesn't even get any tax revenue. So you can understand politicians being a bit nervous about lowering taxes because governments are so massively in debt. But you've got here a policy that you could scrap tomorrow and it wouldn't cost the Exchequer a penny.
I mean, this minimum unit pricing, they would argue, right, it's not a tax, it's a targeted measure of making sure alcohol is sold at a sensible price. If were I to give the SNP view to you now, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, that was the idea. The idea was if you raise the price of the cheapest alcohol, then alcoholics or binge drinkers are going to drink less, and you're going to see these benefits in terms of alcohol-related deaths, hospitalizations, crime, unemployment, and so on. We looked at this again in our study. This has been evaluated in Scotland, but we looked at the data too, and it's very difficult to see any discernible reduction in any of these outcome measures at all. Alcohol-related deaths did go down a bit in 2019, but they shot up in 2020, as they did in England, as they did in Wales. Wales has also now got minimum pricing, by the way. So you don't see any kind of step change in any of these outcomes that are supposed to be related to alcohol. So not only is there a much higher cost to the policy than was projected, the benefits don't seem to be there at all.
Chris, does the evidence not show that as alcohol becomes more affordable, if it's available at a cheaper price point, that drinking and alcohol-related harm would actually go up? Is there not a direct link between the two?
No, there actually isn't. It's often assumed that there will be, and indeed part of the proposal for minimum pricing was based on that kind of fairly blunt assumption. But it's actually not the case. I mean, over the course of the last 15, 20 years in the UK, alcohol, generally speaking, has become more affordable. The government has frozen alcohol duty most years, and yet we've seen a decline in consumption, and that decline in consumption, incidentally, hasn't led to a decline in alcohol-related deaths. So the very simplistic approach you get from people in public health, which is that we need to make alcohol more affordable because then fewer people will drink, and if fewer people are drinking, or rather people are drinking less, if per capita alcohol consumption declines, you'll see this decline in death. You don't see that at all. The lockdown and the whole COVID experience, quite a good natural experiment for that. We did see a huge reduction, obviously, in the availability of alcohol. The pubs and restaurants were closed. We saw a big reduction in the amount of advertising that was carried out by the alcohol industry. And sure enough, we did see a slight decline in alcohol consumption, probably nothing to do with either of those things, actually. But we saw a huge increase in alcohol-related deaths. And in Scotland, for months, people could only buy alcohol in the off-trade. Minimum pricing only really affects alcohol in the off-trade, and yet you saw this huge increase in alcohol-related deaths, just as you did in the rest of the UK. There was no improvement in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK.
Right. So, Chris, then, I'm assuming I don't really need to ask this question, but are you going for scrap, reform, or keep of minimum unit pricing in Scotland and elsewhere?
It's a policy that's put a significant cost onto the Scottish public for no gain. So why would you keep it? It's actually supposed to automatically expire. There is a sunset clause. After 5 years, it's meant to expire unless it can be shown to have worked. I dare say there'll be a lot of academics trying to desperately find some evidence that it has worked, but we certainly couldn't find any.
Well, there we are. So you're firmly in the scrap camp there, Chris. And I'd urge everyone to check out your report and they can find out more about this particular policy. Chris Snowden, Head of Lifestyle Economics there at the Institute of Economic, I cannot say that word, Affairs. Cheers very much for your time. Now, folks, to close the show, it's time for a campus clash. Was it right for Neil Parish MP to resign due to watching porn within the chamber of the House of Commons? Sophie Corcoran is a business student at Durham University, and Anna McGovern, an English student at Queen Mary University of London. Sophie, can I start with you? You're of the view, right, that Neil Parish shouldn't have stepped down over this. Why is that?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm of the view that it is unnecessary. And Anna's about to say in about 5 minutes, well, you would get sacked for any other workplace, and you're right. But unfortunately, the bar is so categorically low in the House of Commons that if we have MPs resigning for just watching porn, then boy, we are going to have no MPs left at this rate. I know for a fact that well, to be honest, the House of Commons is filled by a bunch of degenerates, and there are a lot of MPs that will, have sex with their staffers in their offices. And we've got Claudia Webb, the criminal, still sitting there over nearly 200 days since of being convicted for harassment. I mean, the poor, it's bad to say it, but it's only him really watching porn, considering what a lot of the other lot have done. We're going to have no MPs left, I don't think.
So, Anna, Sophie's view there, that the Parliament, this is just the way of Parliament operates, right? This is what's become the de facto norm in Parliament.
Absolutely not. I could not disagree more with that. I think it's really concerning that we actually have 56 MPs across the House currently under investigation for sexual misconduct. And the fact is, he was in the House of Commons in one of the most powerful positions in the country, there to represent his constituents, just watching porn. He gets an 85k salary to do that. And you could actually argue that is a form of cyber flashing. The fact that he's in the House of Commons just doing that, I think his constituents would be arguing, well, why is he not paying attention to the debate and actually, prioritising the issues that matter to them most? So I think that there's a lot of concerns there. And also, there is absolutely no argument he should have resigned, and it's good that he did.
So, Sophie, were I to be working on a checkout in Tesco, I would rightly lose my job if I was caught watching porn on a personal computer or indeed a phone. Wouldn't you expect a parliamentarian to be held at an even higher standard than, a colleague in Tesco?
My question is about this, though, Darren. Is this about watching porn, or is this about him not doing his job? Because if this is about watching porn, well, there's nothing wrong really with watching porn. Most people in this world watching porn. So is this moral outcry because he was watching porn?
I agree. Consenting adults can watch pornography until their heart's content. But the issue here is that he was watching it in the workplace in the House of Commons, isn't it?
So he wasn't doing his job. I think this is the problem, that he was distracted and he wasn't necessarily doing his job. But then is that different to all of the MPs that sit on their phones on Twitter, playing Angry Birds, playing Candy Crush, not turning up to debates? Is that any different? Or is this a moral outcry because it is porn? That's my question with this.
Anna, is this just you being a sort of Mary Whitehouse type figure? You're just being a patrician, and actually the problem here, paternalistic even, and the problem here is that you've got something against porn.
Oh, I do have something against porn, but that is not the reason why I'm debating against this. I think the point is, Sophie does bring up a good point, that there are MPs just sitting there on their phones, like either playing Candy Crush or Angry Birds. And I'd argue, why should they be using their phones in there in the first place? But especially the fact that he watched it twice, first claiming that it was an accident and then actually admitting to doing it deliberately in a moment of madness. It is a completely inappropriate setting to be watching watching things like that. And in any other workplace, you would be sacked. So it's definitely good that he was gone now.
OK, folks, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. But Sophie and Anna, thank you very much for your time today. I'm sure all of you at home will have views on that, so do tweet me at GBNews. You've been watching Real Britain, though, with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much for your company, as ever. I'm back tomorrow, though, at 2 p.m. for a May Day special. But for now, I'll leave yous with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking rather cloudy with limited sunshine and outbreaks of rain in the west and southwest. Let's take a look at the details. It'll be a cloudy evening across southwest England with patchy outbreaks of rain. The rain heaviest in the north and over the moors, although some brighter spells are possible too. The southeast of England will be mostly cloudy too, but it'll be drier in general. A little light rain is possible for a time. It'll be a rather damp end to the day for southern Wales, a mostly cloudy picture with outbreaks of showery rain, especially in the west. The cloudy theme to the weather continues across the Midlands this Sunday evening. A little patchy, mostly light rain is possible at times, but most places will remain dry with some bright spells. There'll be a brighter end to the day for northeast England with some sunny spells likely here this evening. The odd shower is also possible, but remaining mostly dry for most. It will be a similar story for southern Scotland this evening. Some sunny spells are likely, and although most places will be dry, the odd isolated shower is possible. Some bright or sunny spells are also likely across Northern Ireland this evening after a cloudy, damp day. Mostly dry with just an isolated shower likely, mainly in the north. Rain clearing south overnight, but remaining rather cloudy with some mist and fog patches developing, especially in the west. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight.